Our next speaker follows on the trail of the new purchase, and that's Brad Sanders. He retired from the Clark County school system, where he taught legions of students the art and science of graphic design. And over the years, he's retraced Bartram's path through the South, culminating in his indispensable book, The Guide to William Bartram's Travels. His title as the Bartram Trail Conference's newsletter editor just completely underestimates his influence and his all that he does for us. I also want to note that it's hard to get a copy of the book, but you can go on the Bartram Trail Conference website, and Brad has put in every one of the markers on there, so you can follow it. You can plot out your own voyage through in the wake of William Bartram. Today, as Catherine mentioned, his talk focuses on the Great Buffalo Lick, a site of a culture clash over an English compass, as well as an enigma whose place on the map was almost lost to history. So without further ado, Brad, please join us.
Well, I want to say something about Joel first. Whenever I have a question about Indians, I email Catherine and get some great answers. If I had a question about William Bartram, I would email Joel, and within that day, I would get a very, very long email telling me more than I needed to know. And it was always welcome, but he was a deep well of knowledge, and he was not jealous of his knowledge. He was always willing and ready to talk to anybody about William Bartram. So the Great Buffalo Lick, there are two places I have always been fascinated by. And when I first started following Bartram, we didn't know where they were. One, it was the Great Buffalo Lick, the other was Bartram's Flat Rock. We now know where both of them are, but we're in the new purchase, and the Great Buffalo Lick was on the boundary between the Creek Nation and Georgia. William Bartram was there. Let's see, go forward. I'm not going to go through all of this because Catherine read this to you. The survey party met at the Great Buffalo Lick, and the survey party divided into two parts. Well, actually, I think really three parts. One went north to the Tugaloo River, one went south down to the Ogeechee River, and Edward Bernard sent another group of people down the Broad River to survey the Broad River. But the Great Buffalo Lick was a large area. Bartram says it was several acres. The earth from the superfices, let me get over here, to an unknown depth in an almost white or cinerous colored tenacious fattish clay, which all kinds of cattle lick into great caves, pursuing the delicious vein. It is the common opinion of the inhabitants that this clay is impregnated with saline vapors arising from fossil salts deep in the earth. But I could discover nothing saline in its taste, but I imagined an insipid sweetness. Horned cattle, horses, and deer are moderately fond of it, insomuch that their excrement, which almost totally covers the earth to some distance around this place, appears to be perfect clay, which when dried by the sun and air is almost as hard as brick. I grew up in Oglethorpe County, actually about 6 miles from the Great Buffalo Lick. And you would think that people who've spent their whole lives in Oglethorpe County, my family has been there since the 1840s, would know where such a famous place is, but nobody did. And in fact, the lore in Oglethorpe County got several different stories mixed together in a new story that never really happened. And that is that when they were surveying the boundary between Georgia and the Indian drove his hatchet into a tree and said, "We're not going any farther. This is it." And they say that was at Cherokee Corner. Well, the controversy was at the Great Buffalo Lick, but they got somebody had read Bartram at some point, and in the retelling, it's like the game telephone. you get a new story, which is a lot of fun, actually. There are there are two places that have been marked as the Great Buffalo Lick, and neither one of them is the Great Buffalo Lick. It started out in 1934. Francis Harper said, Bartram unfortunately placed the Buffalo Lick on the headwaters of the Ogeechee River instead of Little River. But the authoritative Purcell map and each of a half dozen or more later maps show it at all place it correctly in southeastern Oglethorpe County. This spot was located in 1934 by Arthur N. Leeds and myself. It answers to Bartram's description, etc. Here we have, over here, Lou Divorcey, Dr. Louis Divorcey, and Gene Weeks vainly looking for the Great Buffalo Lick near Philomath, Georgia. Lou Divorcey was a member of the Bartram Trail Conference in the late 1970s, a founding member. And when the Bartram Trail Conference decided to put a marker in Philomath, it's a wooden marker, and some of it is still there, although it's falling apart. And they were going by Francis Harper's authoritative comment. And Lou Divorcey told me that he didn't think that was it, but he didn't have anything better to convince them to do otherwise, so he just didn't say anything. And this is the part of the map that he refers to. I'm gonna have to get over here so I can point. This is the route that the survey party took from Whitesboro. And here is the Great Buffalo Lick. And of course, looking at this, you can't tell if it's on Long Creek or if it's on Little River. The maps were so generalized. I mean, who can make a decision based on this? So Harper says it's on Little River, right here. And that puts it right at Philomath. So hence, the marker at Philomath. However, because William Bartram said that it was on the head of the Ogeechee River, T.G. McPhee suggested that a marker be put near Union Point, just right outside Union Point, like a mile. Because Bartram said in the swamp, I believe, he didn't say it was, he said, I believe the head branches of the Great Ogeechee River take their rise. So that's the reason why this marker is there. And again, Lou Divorcey and Gene Weeks reading the marker. And yes, Gene was 6 feet 7 inches tall. And this is the marker. I think it was the Works Progress Administration. And it says that this is the site of the Cherokee boundary, and it wasn't. But the marker is still there. I mean, it's granite. It's pretty nice. So what Harper did not have, I don't believe, because this was discovered later, is the map by Philip Young, who was the Deputy Surveyor General of Georgia, and I think of Florida. He was an assistant to Gerard DeBrom. This on the left is the map of the new purchase. It's also called the ceded land because in the legend, it says the land's newly ceded by the Creeks and the Cherokees. But Governor James Wright always called it the new purchase, and that's what we call it. And the box is enlarged over here. You saw this earlier with Catherine. There is the Great Buffalo Lick. There is Boggy Lick, and then there is another lick down here. The lick that's down this way is on the Little River, and that is Philomath. So yes, there was a lick there. This don't call it Buffalo Lick. You'll see why later. And down this way, right here, that's the headwaters of Ogeechee, where Bartram said he believed that the Ogeechee arose at the Great Buffalo Lick. Now, There's only one lick on this map called the Great Buffalo Lick. That's the one that we're interested in, not just any buffalo lick. Lou DeVorsey, because he knew more about stuff like this than anybody else, he and some of his students were able to locate land plats that were granted to Revolutionary War veterans, some of the first settlers in Oglethorpe County. He said that I think they found 5 or 6 different plats they could put together, and then they could georeference it to modern maps. And this one is for David Witt. And I don't know if y'all can see this red dot or not. This is Buffalo Creek. It says that it's Buffalo Creek. There's a little unnamed stream right here, which is dry in the summertime. The Indian boundary was part of one boundary of his property. And in the lower upper right is an ash tree and the Buffalo Lick. Because of this map, Lou DeVorsey was able to figure out pretty exactly, within maybe a quarter of a mile of where it was. And that's all we need to know. We don't need to know the exact place where we can go stand on it, because I can tell you there ain't nothing there but pine trees right now. So this is where it probably was. This is the Crawfordville Road, Georgia 22. And if you're traveling on Georgia 22, you'll come to a crossroads, and oddly enough, to the east is Thaxton Road, to the west is Sims Cross Road, and the Great Buffalo Lick was in the upper quadrant between this intersection. Here's the little stream. During the summertime, it starts to get wet down about this way, and Buffalo Creek is always wet. So this is about where it was, somewhere in here. And Bartram says to the southeast, there was not a swampy area, but there were cane, a field of canes. So southeast, down this way, would be, maybe where it would have been. So is this the Great Buffalo Lick? Tom Gresham, who used to be the president of Historic Oglethorpe, went with Dan Crump out looking for it, and Dan did a lot of research, and they were looking for something on the ground that they thought might look like there had been some kind of disturbance at some point. And this is what they came up with. But in the years since David Witt owned this property, it was probably, they cut the trees down, they ran cows on it, maybe planted tobacco, and then they planted cotton. And then after cotton, we went back to cows, and then we went back to pine trees. So the land has been plowed, disturbed, and unless you're some special kind of geologist who wants to go in and do samples of the soil, we can't do any better than this. But this is what the land looks like now at the Great Buffalo Lick. Well, so the first question was, where was the Great Buffalo Lick? And the compass controversy. I'm not going to go over that again, because Catherine did a good job of this. But something was going on, and the Indians rightly thought that they were being cheated out of land. I don't know why they think the Georgians were going to cheat them out of land, but they did. And Edward Barnett, who led the whole affair, was, I think was probably a very diplomatic person. Bartram certainly seemed to have liked him, and he soothed their feelings and gave them a considerable amount of goods, which always helps. But Lou DeVorsey suggested that there might have been a magnetic anomaly, that this was an honest mistake. And certainly in that day and age, with the primitive instruments that they had, things can get in the way. I was reading about magnetic anomalies, and it can be a change in the difference of the rock composition, the lay of the land. And Lou DeVorsey in his writings suggested a map that I was able to locate, a geomagnetic anomaly map of Georgia. And this is the section just for Oglethorpe County. And I will admit that I don't know what I'm looking at because I don't know anything about magnetic anomalies except for, there we go. Here's the Great Buffalo Lick, the star, and you can see these shapes here suggest strong magnetic anomalies. So that could certainly interfere with the survey instruments. Okay, the second question, were there buffalo in Georgia? And these are not buffalo, they're American bison. And these are in Georgia, and they were a quarter of a mile from my house. The University of Georgia had them for a year in the pasture next to my neighborhood. And then we used to go over there a few months and look at them. And then suddenly they disappeared. They moved them somewhere else. There were about a dozen of them. Starting back with Oglethorpe, a ranger's report to Oglethorpe, we encamped at Oconee River, not in Athens, but down south of here, where we found a horse belonging to one of the Spaniards. We crossed the river and killed 2 buffaloes, of which there are abundance. We've seen several herds of 60 or upwards in a herd. John Lawson, on the left here, traveling in North Carolina in the very early 1700s, drew some animals that he encountered. And in the upper right is allegedly a buffalo, but it looks like a tired cow to me. And I find Lawson's drawings interesting, but here's a possum, I think a bobcat, a bear, and a raccoon, and all of their faces look the same. But I want you to remember this animal right here that doesn't look like a buffalo to me. Von Rick did a drawing of a Yuchi Indian noble person, or a person in the tribe. This was north of Savannah, between Savannah and Augusta, at a place called Mount Pleasant. And he's wearing a buffalo robe. So, but you could get a buffalo robe through trade. You didn't have to kill the buffalo yourself. Mark Caseby said the buffalo hides were so heavy that it was hard for one person to pick one up, and certainly not to go around wearing it on their shoulders. But they probably did make very good bedding. And on the far right, of course, Mark Caseby, 1743, a drawing of an American bison near North Augusta, South Carolina. And without a doubt, that is a bison. And Caseby also wrote about the American bison. He didn't say that he... Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. However, Spanish explorers reported no bison. All recorded sightings of buffalo in Georgia occur between the years 1733 and 1746. I just been warned that I've got to talk fast. Early English settlers were aware of bison in North America, and they may have assumed feral Spanish cattle were the native buffalo. After the passage of the De Soto expedition and so many Native Americans died, it reduced the pressure on buffalo, and they started moving eastward. But I, in my reading, don't think there were very many ever in Georgia. They were, but not to the numbers that the early settlers talked about. So buffalo, like I said, bison is not a buffalo. They are related. They are both bovids, but there's a Cape buffalo, which can't be domesticated. There is the water buffalo, and they can be domesticated. Then we have the American buffalo, which is bison. Buffalo in the 18th century English generally means any bovid other than a domesticated cow. Cattle ranching in the colonial Southeast was a free-range enterprise. Each year they lost about 20% of their herd to the woods. And these herds would grow and they would spread. Bartram wrote, cattle, horses, and deer were moderately fond of it. So who was at the lick were cattle, horses, and deer. And why were there cattle in this area where no white people were supposed to be living, and Indians hadn't lived there in 100 years? I think that they were escaped from cow pens. There were cow pens down near Warrenton, Georgia, and upstate South Carolina. And the vestige or the remnants of those wild herds are the Florida cracker cow. And here are some crackers. And everybody knows what a cracker is, right? Anybody doesn't, I'll tell you, because I am one. And then the Piney Woods cow, which is across the southern part of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And of course, oxen are better for hauling than horses are. They're stronger and they have more stamina. The buffalo, Bartram wrote, the buffalo, urus, once so very numerous as not at this day to be seen in this part of the country. Okay, he said urus. Urus is the Latin word for an extinct, shaggy, long-horned wild ox, which is now called Bos primigenius, formerly common in Europe and thought to be an ancestor of modern domestic cattle. And this is the auroch. So Bartram's Bos urus is another term for the fabled auroch, which became extinct in Poland. In the Latin, it's now Bos primigenius. In English, auroch and ox are cognates. And you've seen aurochs before, the caves of Lascaux. And the most prominent creature on these caves are the aurochs. And young Greek men used to like to play with the aurochs. You grab the horns, you bound over, land on the back, and then you land on the ground, ta-da! And it was a game, but aurochs were at the shoulder about 6 feet tall. So these guys were about twice as heavy as a modern cow. And that's the end of what you need to know about the aurochs and the buffalo. But there were a few buffalo in Georgia, but oddly enough, we don't find any. They didn't find remnants, bones. I think what they were seeing were wild cattle, and they called them buffalo because they had a broad meaning. The Great Buffalo Lick, out of the 3 licks, is the one that hasn't been marked, and the William Bartram chapter of the Society of Daughters of Colonial American Colonists, I finally got it right, is going to pay for a marker and have it put up at the Great Buffalo Lick at the intersection of Georgia 22 and Sims Cross Road right here. And hopefully at the next conference, I can give you show you a picture of it. I have 5 minutes. Oh, I misread. Okay. So any questions about the Great Buffalo Lick? Yes, Wade. You mentioned in politics. I don't know a lot about that, but several of us went with Lou DeVorsey some years ago out to the Buffalo Lick, the Great Buffalo Lick, and he had taken soil samples and got them analyzed, but couldn't come up with anything definitive. But we were talking about this, and that, you know, in humans, there's a thing known as geophagy, that people want to eat white clay. Well, animals do too. And he was thinking that there was probably a vein of clay that they were after. And but nobody's located it, but he seemed to think that that had something to do with the Buffalo Licks. Michael.
You, well, no, Bobby Griffith, I guess, went to you, and they took me out to what you said was Buffalo Lick many, many years ago. And you described in Bartram where they were caves at the lick.
Mm-hmm.
You went out there was something called outcrop. that had all the caves. Is that similar place?
It's nearby, but that place is called the Buffalo Rock. And that's the local lore, is that the buffalo licked the holes in the rock. This is a rock face. It's kind of like a little small cliff that's got holes at the base. But probably that was just a weak place in the rock that got eroded away. Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Like, Brent. Yes, more or less. It's the Crawfordville, part of the Crawfordville Road. It comes up from Crawfordville and comes through Philomath. And, looking at the maps, there's no way that that they didn't go through the little community of Philomath. Just looking at the creeks and the rivers and all.
Well, would that follow a bridge between the two rivers?
Yes, exactly. From the time they crossed the little river, they seemed to stay on high ground all the way up to the Hudson River, and where the Hudson and the South Fork come together. Middle. Okay, you know more about it than I do. And at that point, then they started crossing streams, but they didn't cross any before that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are Buffalo Creeks and Buffalo Lick and Buffalo River all over the Southeast. And from my reading, and you start reading about this and you can drive yourself crazy and spend the whole day at the computer, that they did push farther eastward into Kentucky and Virginia and Mississippi. They didn't seem to get over into South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, east of the Appalachians very much, although they did. And another thing that I was thinking about is Buffalo. Somebody in one of my reading that said that they're grazers, they're not browsers. In the eastern United States, there's not a lot of grazing like in the Great Plains. There's a lot of browsing. So if there were herds, they were going to be very small, like a family unit is what it was.